how they healed from it in a way that they didn't come out of that experience carrying any prejudices against the people who had been prejudiced towards them. Mm-hmm. And I am fortunate because I wasn't taught to be prejudiced of anybody because of their choice, their decision to not perpetuate that kind of hatred or negativity or judgment. And having done that piece, it resonated so much more deeply with the same art prize visitors who'd seen, they're like, well, the other ones are pretty, but this is powerful.
Yeah.
And then this past year, I switched completely and went back to painting, which I hadn't done since the Loma Prieta earthquake. So I think that was 1989 was the last time I'd ever painted on canvas. And I decided I wanted to carry that kintsugi theme through further. And I did a painting of a heart with gold fracture lines running through the heart. But the gold fracture lines weren't painted. They were made of folded cranes with, I used gold origami paper and then graduated those cranes from a 1/2 inch square up to 6-inch squares and ran the fracture lines all throughout and across the heart. So now it's a different process for me because now I'm expanding into mixed media. And I think for me, the first to really directly answer your question, I guess, is there's the message of what do I want people to feel? And for me, it's become very clear that what I want people to feel is hopeful, that there are still possibilities, but on a more personal level than what my first mobiles had conveyed to people. And it just feels that everything continues to fall into place. This year I had right after the big whirlwind of the 60-second doc coming out, I received a very shocking health diagnosis and thought about, well, do I go public with that or do I keep it personal? And I very quickly realized it's impossible for me to keep it personal. I've been blogging for so long and I have so many friends everywhere. And once I started telling a few friends, I realized this is impossible. I can't keep updating each person individually.
Right.
And so I decided I'm just going to put it on my blog, on my old blog. And so I put on there that I had found out kind of by accident that I have these really rare brain tumors. And I kind of resist calling them tumors because that's not an absolute diagnosis because they can't test them. They're too deep inside the center of my head.
Okay.
And so there's MRIs that have been done. There are spectroscopy tests to look at the chemical composition of them. And pretty much, 2 neuro-oncologists, a neurosurgeon, 2 radiologists, everyone's saying, yeah, they're grade 2 bilateral deep thalamic gliomas. And so for me, that was a shock, and it brought everything to a grinding halt in May of this year. But I was determined to still get my art prize entry done. I was determined to still try to get 12 of my mobiles exhibited all in one time at one place this year. And I was able to do that thanks to the Grand Rapids Asian Festival and having an art exhibit in conjunction with the festival this past June. So I feel like I set myself back by choice a bit. I didn't close my Etsy shop, which my first gut reaction was just stop everything. But it's like, no, I've worked too hard to kill the momentum because I know how hard that would be to start over. And now I'm just at this point of working really hard on my diet, on my lifestyle to improve my odds of just being able to reverse these tumors myself because they're inoperable. There's nothing that they can do for them at this point except watch and wait and see if they become more serious and spread or create symptoms. And so in the meantime, I'm just doing my thing. I went through this very dark period of fear and sadness for a few months. But by the time Art Prize came around, I was starting to feel better about all of it. And now I really emotionally feel like I'm right back where I was before that diagnosis came through. So
well, that's
just
good.
moving forward, just focusing and moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. So after your diagnosis, did your art change in any way, or was it that you were already on a similar or a certain path with your entries that you didn't change them?
It changed. The piece, the Kintsugi heart that I did this year was something I had intended to do next year. I was going to go back and do more mobiles this year, and had already decided what they would be. I'd already folded 1,000 butterflies. I was already folding 1,000 tiny koi goldfish. But with that diagnosis, coupled with the knowledge that, oh, they're not going to have Art Prize next year. It had been an annual event for 10 years, but they've changed the format at the end of this year, and now it will be every other year. And my first thought when I heard that, because that was still kind of in the dark period, was, well, will I still be here in 2 years? Right. I better do this now. So I set everything I had already folded aside and started a brand new entry just a couple months before Art Prize. But I was glad I did it, and it was the idea, I would say, was one of those ideas in my head. I'd already wanted to do a Kintsugi heart painting for years, but the idea to incorporate it with the origami was because of bringing it to Art Prize. I knew if I showed up with just a painting, those people who had come, the visitors, my friends now, who'd been coming for 5 years, they'd be like, how could you come here without bringing us tiny cranes to look at? So then I had to think, well, how could I incorporate the cranes? And first I was thinking, well, I could still hang strands of cranes around a painting or put the cranes into the background. And at some point it just clicked in my head, no, I should make the broken lines out of cranes. And then it wasn't intended. It was one of those happy accidents. I realized they represent the healing of a broken heart. And the cranes, particularly gold cranes, represent peace. And so I had inadvertently made a piece that represented inner peace inside your heart. And I did have one lady ask if it was for sale because I didn't offer it for sale. But I told her, no, this one is for me. Like, this is my inspiration and motivation to keep myself on track this year in particular. So I told her I'm open to commissions, but no, that one wasn't for sale. And it's sitting in my studio. I'm looking at it right now as I talk to you.
Oh, that's great. So has your routine or how you approach your days changed since your diagnosis?
Not really. Not at this point. I just fold always. I'm constantly folding something, it seems like, or cutting paper, because people will look at the mobiles and say, that's amazing. That's so much work. And I point out to them, it's days just to cut 1,000 tiny pieces of paper. And that part's not fun because they think folding is tedious. It's like, no, the folding is fun. Cutting the paper is tedious. Hanging 1,000 tiny cranes is even more tedious than cutting the paper. But the process of folding is something that just had always felt good to me when I did it. And I would joke with people when I lived in California that I thought I must have some form of creative OCD because there's no other explanation for why I keep doing this. But at least it's beautiful and something I could market. And then I went to Art Prize, and a couple different people that very first year commented to me about this has to be a form of working meditation. And when they said that, it clicked that yes, it's soothing, it's calming, it's repetitive, it lets me clear my mind, and that, yeah, that's it. And that sounds much, much more elegant than creative OCD. So I've gone with that now, moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So if there are other aspiring origami artists listening to this, what advice would you give them about starting out, or best practices you've learned to monetize and kind of make additional revenue from your art?
I would say a couple of the most important things are, for most people, if you've never run your own business, you need to understand how much work the entrepreneur part is above and beyond the artist part. So do what you love, make what you love, work your craft, work your art, whatever you're doing, but realize that to really turn it into a business is a lot more commitment. And I say this because there are people, of course, in the world who want to be artists, but their parents want them to go to college or do something that will be more productive. So I say to them, major in business, major in marketing. It's something you'll be able to turn around and use for yourself later. Mm-hmm. I started out as an advertising art major and dropped out 3 months before I was supposed to graduate because I just found the curriculum too stifling and thought I'd never want to do this for a living. And then I quit college, much to everyone's horror, and I went into retail sales. And I'd never done that before, but I loved it and I was good at it. And so I learned retail. I learned customer service. I learned selling. I learned merchandising and cashiering and inventory control, all those kinds of things. So that when I finally started my own companies, I had a working business background to fall back onto. So I think that would be my best advice. If you don't like speaking to people, then it's good to learn how to be comfortable to speak publicly, because it's the only way you'll be able to market your business yourself most effectively. You can market without being a good public speaker, but if you become a good public speaker, you'll be much, much more effective. And I did that taking 2 very intense workshops, public speaking workshops that were actually designed to help wedding DJs expand their skill set to be professional masters of ceremony. Because there's a big difference between a DJ who plays music and the master of ceremony who introduces, the wedding party, the bride and groom, keeps the timeline running smoothly with announcements, all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And because I worked in the wedding industry, I was able to kind of drop into these workshops and do these 3-day intensives. And they got me over my fear of public speaking. And I'm very, very grateful that, I was able to do that with it's Mark and Rebecca Farrell and their Marbecca method. So that, again, is another thing where it's just completely outside the box. That not being a DJ, why would I go take, and not wanting to be a master of ceremony, why would I put myself through this kind of awful experience of, being on a microphone in front of people I don't know, learning speaking skills. But I did it because it's necessary, and that's what I always do. It's like, I don't like to have my picture taken, but I've learned you get your picture taken. If somebody wants to take your picture to help promote your business, you do it. You go beyond your comfort zone because it all comes back at the end of the day. The only other piece of advice I would give people if they want to pursue miniature origami like me is you have to be realistic and realize that, well, you might be a rock star and get lucky, like a lotto winner, and just everything falls into place immediately and you're making more money than you know what to do with. But if that's not going to happen for you, then you need to figure out how to do it in a way that makes it possible. And again, for me, if I had stayed in Silicon Valley, I wouldn't even have time to do this as a hobby because I'd be too busy working in order to, as I've said before, survive. But by moving to West Michigan, where the cost of living is much more affordable, I've changed, that whole foundation of, well, what are my financial needs, to something that makes it plausible that, yes, I can earn enough. And I don't spend a lot of money. Like, I still drive my car. It's a 94. I don't buy the newest iPhone every year. So I think my monetary needs are fairly modest, but I buy a lot of paper. which can actually become quite